The Kingdom Hearts franchise is one that is well known and recognized around the world. Even if you're not a JRPG player, the chances are at some point you might have seen or heard something about these games. What started off as a crazy collaboration between Square Enix and Disney has turned into something no one could have ever imagined, with multiple numbered entries, multiple non-numbered entries, re-releases on the PS3, concerts, a mobile game, re-releases on the PS4, a rhythm game, a movie about a box, and memes. A lot of memes. You get the idea. What started off pretty wild to begin with is now just out of control. But don't worry, Nomura knows exactly what he's doing, we just need to have faith. And hopefully you're okay with verse 13. Despite all the memes and criticism that these games receive nowadays, I'm always proud to say this franchise means a lot to me on a more personal level, and I truly find it to be one of a kind. You can find multiple and endless discussions about how crazy and silly the plot of these games is at this point, but what's quite sad is that there is way more of these discussions going on than actually looking at what the games have to offer to the player individually. The Kingdom Hearts bubble is pretty massive, with 10 games available to be experienced on current consoles, although it should be pointed out 2 of those are actually movies and 1 is a demo. That said, it's still a whole lot of content to get through. So a few months back, I announced how my next big project will be to go through the entire playable franchise, and I repeat, the keyword here is playable, so unfortunately no 358 over 2 days or recoded will be included, but even without those 2 projects, I still have a fair amount to get through here, so we're looking at about 7 full-length games as well as 1 short experience in 0.2 Birth by Sleep. This is far from something I can get done in a couple months. As I go through these games, the aim will be not to just finish the main story, but everything they have to offer, meaning collectibles, secret bosses, and yes, I did actually claim to try and get 100% on the trophies along the way, which I do still plan on doing, but I might have to leave some of these platinum trophies for after I've completed the critiques, simply because, yeah, I'm looking at you, Birth by Sleep. However, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because in today's video we will start at the very beginning, back when the name Kingdom Hearts was a single game, not a franchise, and there was no 1.5 plus 2.5 remix added at the end. Forget the idea of all these other games and focus on just the one. What does the original Kingdom Hearts have to offer to you, the player? Being considered by many the most simplistic and outdated entry, it is still extremely loved by the fanbase and considered to be one of the best entries overall. Initially, I was planning on calling this video something along the lines of Kingdom Hearts, simplicity at its finest. However, once I actually started playing it again with a much more critique-focused mindset, I came to a realization this game is more than just nostalgia. It is far more of a complete package than people give it credit for. Out of all the games, Kingdom Hearts 1 is probably the one I've played the most in my younger years, having finished it about 5 or 6 times already, and I have actually managed to get a platinum trophy in the past, but we'll talk more about that later. It's worth pointing out a few things before we actually start. This is the PS4 version of the game, meaning it's technically Kingdom Hearts 1 Final Mix, and the graphics have seen an upgrade since its original release back in 2002. But let's be honest, anyone who actually decides to play these games again, whether that's before or after watching this video, you're not exactly gonna grab a PS2 and buy the original copy, you're just gonna get the newest one, which is the PS4 or the PC version. I will have to point out how there will be spoilers throughout this video. I was really contemplating if I should keep it spoiler free, but in order to cover most of the important sections, there's just no way around it. So this is going to include things like story, bonus bosses, hidden areas, and character specific events. So I do recommend playing through the game first if you haven't already. However, it's not until the later half of the video that I go into deep spoilers. So if you don't mind some of the more minor stuff, then feel free to stick around for the opening segments. And lastly guys, as you know, these videos do take an extremely long amount of time to make, especially when this isn't my job. I can't dedicate all my time to it, so if you do enjoy the video, a like or a comment would mean everything. It helps me reach a wider audience and possibly new viewers for future Kingdom Hearts critiques or any other videos I have planned. But now with the far too long of an introduction out of the way, let's dive deep into Kingdom Hearts 1 and everything it has to offer. Kingdom Hearts has you following the story of Sora, a young, caring, energetic, and also extremely naive boy. You begin the game on Destiny Island alongside 2 of your best friends, Riku and Kairi. Together you decide to build a raft that will get the 3 of you off the island so that you can break free of your current day-to-day life. So after 2 days of running around getting everything Kairi demands in order to be prepared, you're ready to go. Except that the night before you set out, your island gets infested by shadow creatures that you can't seem to do any damage to. After running around a little bit, you find Riku, who seems a bit too calm about all of this. He goes on to tell you how the door has opened and you can travel to other worlds now. As darkness is about to take over Sora's body, he awakens to a new power. That of course being the Keyblade. Unfortunately, Riku seems to have disappeared by this point, but you're determined to find Kairi with your new weapon in hand. Soon after finding her, your reunion doesn't last long because in just a few seconds, the island gets fully consumed by darkness and the 2 of you become separated once again. Sora is faced with a challenge of fighting a huge shadow right before being sucked up into a black void, only to have him realize the next time he wakes up, he's in a completely new world. This therefore means that that Riku was correct, the door has indeed opened and you travel to a different world. This intro segment is fairly short, but it leaves the player with multiple questions to have them be intrigued. How did Riku know all of this? What happened to Kairi? What caused the door to open and why now? And why are Sora's shoes so massive? That last one has never been answered, unfortunately. Whilst all of this is happening over on Destiny Islands, you also get an insight into a completely different world where Donald Duck and Goofy are royal guards of the king, who of course is none other than Mickey Mouse. Honestly, I've played this game so many times, but saying it out loud just never makes any more sense. What we find out is that King Mickey has left to explore and discover the truth as to why so many worlds have been recently falling into darkness. And whilst he's out there doing that, he requests that Donald and Goofy find the Keyblade wielder, as he will be the solution to these events taking place. As Sora explores the new town he's landed in, he bumps into Leon alongside Yuffie, who then start explaining to him how the weapon he holds is called a Keyblade and he has been chosen as its master. This weapon allows him to deal with shadow creatures known as the Heartless, the same ones that you encountered on your island. Whenever someone loses their heart, they too become a Heartless. It's kinda in the name, but with this Keyblade in hand, Sora is the only one capable of saving the different worlds from falling into darkness, as each individual world has its own keyhole which can only be sealed with the Keyblade. Only once the keyhole has been sealed is the world fully safe and locked away. Soon after this explanation, Sora has to fight off the Heartless around the town, only to find himself bumping into Donald and Goofy, who have been searching for him this entire time. The three of you take down a more challenging Heartless and decide to work together, as it is in everyone's best interest. Sora is able to explore many worlds searching for his friends. Meanwhile, Donald and Goofy found the man they were looking for. Now it's just a matter of finding the king. I would say it's at this point that the real opening hours of Kingdom Hearts are complete. Even though Destiny Island is technically the prologue, it's after Traverse Town that you are set out on your whole journey. You have your motive to go from one world to another, as well as better understanding of what it is you should be doing to help those worlds along the way. Overall, I would say the opening act of Kingdom Hearts is pretty strong and well written. It doesn't feel too rushed, and it takes its time to make sure you have a good understanding of this world and how things will work moving forward. It's a great mixture of character introductions telling you a bit about them, but also what their objectives and motivations are, comedy aspects that shine through at some very sudden moments, and it also manages to prove you can somehow mix a brand new IP with Disney and Final Fantasy. Again, no matter how many years it's been, this is still crazy to believe. From here on out, Sora, Donald and Goofy form a team, a trio that travels across many Disney worlds, searching for their own personal objectives, all whilst being unable to stay away from helping others and ensuring the worlds they visit don't have to suffer the same fate as your home island. You witnessing the island falling into darkness firsthand makes a much more believable and serious scenario than just having someone tell you this is what happens. It's a very small but effective way of storytelling. Kingdom Hearts can actually be considered very simple as far as the story goes, well, until you reach the end, but a bit more on that later. It doesn't try making everything extremely serious or edgy, which just makes it easier for every type of player to get intrigued. We'll talk about the story in more detail later on, because rather than spending the first half talking about just the story, I want to focus on the gameplay side of things next. And then once that's covered, we'll return to talk about the story with a bit more spoilers afterwards. So if you're still watching this, hoping for minimum spoilers, you should still be good for the next couple minutes. However, just letting you know, you might see some bosses or enemy types, so just watch at your own risk. The gameplay section will be covering a lot, so I do want to split this into mini segments, but the first thing I want to touch on is the combat, as after all, this is what Kingdom Hearts is all about. Coming from a company known for phenomenal turn-based combat, Kingdom Hearts was a very pleasant surprise being an action RPG. You have your basic attacks, which at the beginning of the game is essentially all you have available, making it come off extremely slow, tedious and kinda boring at times. But as you continue and you play on, you start unlocking a variety of combat options, such as magic, summonings and skills. Despite pretty much all RPG-like games unlocking more abilities as you play on, I would say Kingdom Hearts is one of the best as far as the feeling of achievement you get each and every single time you unlock something new. A lot of this sensation comes from the fact that your first 3 to 5 hours of the game you have access to basic attacks and maybe 1 or 2 magic spells. Unlocking these new skills and abilities initially takes a lot of time, but it actually makes you work with what you have and making their strength at that time. There isn't a sudden point in the game where you become overpowered, it's all gradual build up as well as you gradually polishing your skills. Even though the game's combat is clunky and stiff compared to modern standards, as you play on you get more accustomed to it, plus the wide range of different abilities you have makes it look much smoother than it actually is. Magic is unlocked as you progress through the game, sometimes from completing certain worlds, different challenges, or even talking with specific characters. Each one of these spells can also be improved by similar methods. If you wanted to improve Thunder into Thundara, you need to defeat a story boss. However, if you wanted to take that step further and unlock Thundaga, then you need to defeat a boss in the Hades Cup, a tournament that doesn't unlock into the last section of the story. I would highly recommend getting each magic spell to its max level, because some of these don't show just how good they are until they're fully maxed out. If you were to ask me for a top 3, I would easily say Cure is your most important spell in the game. you'll be spamming this on every single boss you ever fight. Arrow is a close second as it provides you with a defensive barrier, and finally I would say Gravity just because it does wonders against enemies with shields. Next, as far as the summons go, these are all Disney characters as well that vary from Simba to Genie, Tinkerbell or even Bambi. Each one has different abilities and different reasons for why you should actually use it in battle. A personal favourite of mine would have to be Tinkerbell, as she flies around and constantly heals you, giving you a bit more freedom to just attack whilst she covers your health. Another good one would be Bambi, as it constantly drops orbs around the area, meaning you can spam magic all you want. This is especially beneficial when you're fighting multiple enemies at once, which pretty much is the entirety of endgame. Lastly, I want to go over the abilities you earn as you level up. Unlike magic or summons, the way you acquire abilities most of the time is simply leveling up. As you reach a specific level, you unlock a skill. These skills can range from attack moves, limit breaks, item drop and pickup rates, the ability to block or see your enemy's HP, surviving fatal hits, or being able to heal without being interrupted. Now, as far as what level you need to be to unlock these skills, that actually depends on a choice you won't even realize you made way back when. At the start of the game, you're asked to choose a weapon, whilst also sacrificing another. This mini section determines at what level you unlock a certain skill. One choice might mean you see your enemy health a little bit earlier, whilst another could mean you can earn some crucial skills like Leaf Bracer or Second Chance much earlier on. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to choose or what the worst option is, but all I'm saying is the shield looks pretty cool. Kingdom Hearts does a great job of constantly giving you these new abilities to potentially use, however at a cost. Each ability takes up AP points. The better the ability is considered, the more it takes up, meaning the decision is up to the player. Would you rather only have 3 abilities that take up all your AP points, or would you rather sacrifice one to equip 2 or 3 others? Some abilities are definitely much better than others, but it takes trial and error, especially with the combat related ones, to figure out what you consider the best. For me, Strike Rate is and always will be my go-to, as it makes you pretty much invincible whilst working effectively against enemies with shields. Outside of the abilities, you also have weapons that need equipping. All 3 characters have their individual weapons: Sora with the Keyblade, Goofy with the shield, and Donald with the magic staff. Because why not? Whenever you're selecting a weapon, they will all display a physical and magic statistic for you to choose which one suits you best. It's worth pointing out the size of each weapon does actually matter, yet the game doesn't let you know about this. It's just a little something to consider whenever you're debating between 2 Keyblades and one is twice the length. This is a good time to bring up the fact that Sora is the only playable character. That said, it doesn't necessarily mean Donald and Goofy just do whatever they feel like. What your job is to change the priorities in battle. Would you rather have them focus on physical or magical attacks? Should they be offensive or defensive? You can adjust these at all times outside of battle, so it's worth looking into before heading into specific areas or before certain bosses. I would normally have Donald play a bit more defensive and heal me up, but I did also want him to deal some magical damage. Just know that whatever you do not give them any items, because they will use that up in 20 seconds flat. The combat overall isn't something to blow you away, especially now in 2021, 20 years after the original release. It's lacking a lot of that speed and flashiness we've come to expect from the action RPG. It is worth pointing out that despite this being a 20-year-old system, it is genuinely enjoyable and smooth enough to not be too frustrating. Or at least that's the case in the second half of the game. The first 5 to 10 hours might take time to get used to, especially whilst only having the basic magic spells. I can easily see people being thrown off by this, as it gives the assumption that that's just how the combat will be forever. However, I would argue the pacing of unlocking abilities and improving the combat is actually good, as it prevents you from burning out, but also saves the best things for the late game when you have the toughest challenges ahead, which we will definitely talk about later. So overall, I guess my main point would be that by the end game, combat is fun and has enough variety to be called enjoyable even when you have to grind. However, getting past the first few hours and accepting the combat just isn't too quick can be a bit more difficult for some players. With combat touched on, next up I want to focus on the setting, the worlds you'll be exploring and what comes with each one. And I think the first thing that should be said is that no, unfortunately, not all worlds are created equally. This is something you're going to notice early on as soon as you're done with more than the first 3 worlds. Wonderland, Colosseum and Deep Jungle will be the first 3 worlds you visit after Traverse Town. If you're familiar with Kingdom Hearts 1, you will know these 3 worlds are all extremely different from one another, yet they all serve as a perfect introduction to just what you could be expecting moving forward. I believe it's important for a game to set expectations early on, so whilst I feel like Kingdom Hearts fails to do this with its combat, it definitely makes up for it with its range of unique locations. Each world is filled with interactive areas and objectives throughout the map, hidden locations for you to explore, treasure chests full of items, Trinity symbols that you can't do straight away so you have to come back later, and of course, puppies. Yes, I did just say puppies. Outside of their individual stories, each world gives you a reason to explore and something to come back to down the line, especially if you're trying to get 100%. There is always so much to find, with some things being unreachable unless you have specific abilities. Honestly, getting 100% on each world was one of the most fun parts of this entire playthrough. Most of these worlds will have you take part in their individual stories until you reach the end section, which has you sealing the keyhole. This usually involves a boss fight just before, and I'm happy to say even all these years later, most of the bosses in this game feel extremely unique. These range from one-on-one fights with Disney villains to giant heartless, giant Disney villains, or even a giant house with purple pimples. With each world, you will discover new enemy types. Some are more challenging or frustrating, just depending on their designs. I'm looking at you, Agrobar. This makes you approach certain enemies a little differently rather than using the same tactics for each one. Some can't be attacked head on, whilst others heal if you use the wrong magic on them. It's the little details like this that prevent you from just switching off during combat, especially when playing on a harder difficulty. And since we're on the topic of difficulty already, I just want to quickly throw it out there. This isn't exactly a hard game. It can be a good challenge, but it is definitely not what I would consider hard. There are some very unique worlds, such as the 100 Acre Woods or the Colosseum. Both of these have a story, however, it's not necessarily presented the same way. In 100 Acre Woods, you will need to find pages in other worlds just to get through the entire story, meaning you'll most likely keep coming back every few hours or so, or you can just save it for near the end the way I did. That said, even when you do get down to it, you're not going to find yourself battling Heartless, but instead playing mini-games that no other world offers. This just serves as a nice breath of fresh air for any player. However, it should be pointed out that it is also 100% skippable if you choose to do so. In fact, you can skip multiple worlds and still get through the entire game. Overall, when looking at the worlds, there are some that are definitely much longer than others, and unfortunately, it's often the worst ones that feel the longest. For me, the worst two would have to be Deep Jungle and Monstro, shocker. Both of these are some of the most difficult worlds to navigate, with many entry points looking the exact same. You will have multiple occasions when you're just not sure which way to go, so you're wandering back and forth, or you'll just end up falling down the wrong section, causing more frustration. This can be extremely painful in Deep Jungle, where you will feel sick sliding down massive trees and swinging on vines within the first 30 minutes. It might be cool the first time you do it, but it's not so much fun when you're lost and you end up doing the same thing 5 times in a row. Now, you might have noticed how I didn't actually bring up Atlantica, which seems to be everyone's least favorite world in this game. However, the reason for that is I kinda like Atlantica for what it is. Now, I'm not oblivious, I know it is in no way a great world, however, I like the situation it puts you in. Now that you have to swim around rather than run, a lot of what you've learned and got comfortable with has been taken away from you. Some skills are unavailable, controls are different, and you might have to rely on different tactics to get through. I see it more as like a training arc. I'm pretty sure 99% of you guys will disagree, but if you are that 1% and you agree with me, then let me know in the comments. Even with some of these levels being far from perfect, the combination of music, characters, and movie nostalgia is one of the biggest selling points of Kingdom Hearts. You want to find out what Disney worlds you'll see next. Some of these may hit you on a much more personal level than others, or sometimes you might be playing through a world you've never heard of and it intrigues you to find out more about it. But if we're talking about all these worlds, we of course have to discuss how to reach them. What brilliant method of transport do we have at our disposal when trying to reach a new mysterious world? Ladies, gentlemen, say hello to the most stressful LEGO ship you will ever meet. The gummy ship. Something that is fairly criticised even by the biggest Kingdom Hearts fans. This, in my eyes, is a clear example of a great idea, just horrendous execution. Whenever you wish to travel to a new world, you will be required to travel through space using your gummy ship. You can blast away blocks and enemies to gather materials and you get a score each time. In all honesty, this part I don't actually have an issue with. Understandably, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but there is a therapeutic side to it where you're just shooting away through space. That of course stops being the case when you reach the final worlds. These sections suddenly become much more difficult to handle if you plan on using the same ship you started with. So like any other person, your first instinct would be to upgrade your ship. However, this is where things get annoyingly frustrating. The garage section for the gummy ship can come off very messy and overwhelming. I know from past experience that this was something I would have never attempted because it felt like any time I touched something, it just went wrong. That is of course until I had to get a gummy ship related trophy for the platinum, and I spent hours just understanding how all of this works to benefit me the most. So whilst it can be quite frustrating and it isn't exactly the most fun part of the game, do keep in mind luckily you don't have to do this often. It's just a few journeys here or there and then it's all in the past. But I think with that out of the way, that wraps up most of the main parts of gameplay. I'm sure some of these things you might have wanted me to address in a bit more detail, however there's still a solid amount to get through and I'm trying to focus on what I consider the most important parts. Next up, I wanted to discuss the story in a bit more detail, what I found to be good or great, but also the sections that could have been done to a much better degree. In case you are still watching this having never played Kingdom Hearts or you're currently playing, then I highly advise you stop here as I will not hold back any spoilers. So with that out of the way, let's get straight into it. Kingdom Hearts has a genuinely fulfilling and understandable story. This might be hard to believe for some, especially those who have never touched any of the games, but the original story alone is executed extremely well. Whilst Sora, Donald and Goofy travel from world to world sealing keyholes, we get snippets of what's happening behind the scenes because of the supposedly main villain Maleficent. Alongside many other iconic Disney villains such as Jafar, Captain Hook or even Hades, you see them plotting against the three of you as they are gathering up the Princesses of Heart. However, in due time we find out Maleficent has another trick up her sleeve, that of course being Riku, who I will discuss more in just a moment. Despite the fact that it has Disney attached to it with all its worlds and characters, it manages to provide a story interesting enough to have the players stick around through to the end. For some players, they may have started the game for Disney and Final Fantasy aspects, however, as they played on, they ended up staying and finishing it for Kingdom Hearts the video game. A huge reason for that is the easily lovable cast of characters and how they interact with one another, such as the main trio. Sora, Donald and Goofy are a perfect fit. They work smoothly with one another and sometimes you could easily forget they're not actually game original characters. But speaking of original characters in Kingdom Hearts, we get a grand total of 4. At least the ones that matter, that is. It might seem crazy that a game with over 100 characters, I don't actually know the exact amount so please don't ask, and only 4 of them being original can be considered an original game, but that is really the case. Kingdom Hearts does a great job having characters from different media take on a bigger role in a grand story. For example, all the Disney villains casually using Heartless as they please, Leon, Yuffie and Aerith all helping you understand what it means to be a Keyblade wielder, only to then find out they actually had a home in the first place which got overrun by darkness, Sid helping you with your gummy ship and acting as your mechanic of sort, allowing you to travel further into new worlds. This is often said about Kingdom Hearts, but it's honestly so true, it shouldn't work, but it really does. There is a bridge connecting all these characters, the world, the overall story, and that bridge is Sora. Sora as a character is easy to love. Overall throughout the internet, he's not really considered someone people have a problem with. He has this innocent charm to him that a child of his age would have in a real life scenario. He enjoys this idea of an adventure and being a cool kid with a special new weapon. I mean, look at the way he flexes on Riku in this scene. Look at him. His personality doesn't feel forced, and whenever he does say something silly or acts a bit dumb, you just let it go because once again, this is a child. I think Square deserves a bit more credit for choosing to create a younger than usual protagonist that manages not to be annoying for the most of the game. Not to say this is the only time they ever did this, but it's just less common. If you're someone young playing Kingdom Hearts for the first time, you can relate to Sora, his excitement, and sense of feeling cool because of the Keyblade. On the other hand, as an older player, you might be able to see a reflection of your younger innocent self that didn't overthink or overcomplicate situations. As long as he manages to see his friends, that's all that matters to him, the consequences are a second thought. Now going back to Riku, I mentioned earlier how he's taken advantage of by Maleficent. The opening hours of the game showcase Riku as a strong-minded leader of the group with his goals set on visiting other worlds. However, it's during the Maleficent scenes that we get to witness his downfall and weaknesses. Just like Sora, his objective is to save Kairi, who has lost her heart, and Maleficent uses that to her advantage. Slowly with each cutscene we see Riku fall deeper and deeper into darkness, carrying out tasks for the bad guys, and each time Sora encounters him in a different world, he's no longer the same person he was before. This character we saw as strong-willed and determined is now being shown as weak and sensitive. Up to this point, you have been going from one Disney world to another, taking part in what is a mixture of its original Disney story with Heartless sprinkled throughout. This is what you find yourself doing for most of the game, however some people will go as far as to call this filler and not necessarily the story, which I couldn't disagree with anymore. Not only for the reason that each world will give you a bit more information about the overall plot, but you'll be missing out one of the most important segments of Kingdom Hearts, which is the development and growth of Sora. I like to compare Sora and Riku as two sides of the same mountain, the end objective being the same, but the path to get there is much different. As I mentioned earlier, these characters are kids, so as Sora goes from one world to another, he interacts with new people and he grows up. The entire journey of Kingdom Hearts is about understanding what really matters. Although it might not be obvious or spoon-fed, each time he leaves an area he has matured and learned something new about himself, how to approach different scenarios and for what reason. But he does all of this whilst remaining true to himself. Riku on the other hand is trying to achieve things much faster. By any means possible, he wants to achieve his goal which sends him down a darker path. We see him in different worlds being more of a menace than actually helping and only focusing on himself, not being influenced by what's happening to others. His goal is everything to him, but in the process he shuts off all that's clearly happening around him. All of this build up is a reason why I love the opening scene of Hollow Bastion so much.
Let the Keyblade choose. Its true master.
I remember the first time I witnessed this moment, I felt anger towards Riku. The guy that is supposed to be Sora's best friend is now humiliating him and taking away what makes him special. However, this scene is in fact the opposite for Sora. After having his Keyblade taken away, making him feel unworthy as well as being left behind by Donald and Goofy, #trailers, the first thing Sora does is team up with Beast, and he claims he's not done yet because he needs to find someone important to him. He doesn't let Riku's action change him, he remains true to himself and continues the same path regardless if that is with or without the Keyblade in hand. This scene right here shows us how it's not the Keyblade that makes Sora special. What makes him special is himself. His loving and caring personality that makes him put everyone else ahead of himself. It's these actions and stubbornness from Sora that end up having Donald and Goofy protect him despite him no longer being the Keyblade wielder. He made a real bond with them, which is worth more than blindly following an objective, quite the opposite of Riku's tunnel vision. That's why all those previous interactions in other worlds were so important, to have Sora grow whilst remaining himself and understanding how he might have to deal with different situations, in result, making him a truly worthy Keyblade wielder. Riku's eventual takeover by Ansem is a good representation of losing yourself bit by bit to your actions and only realising once it's too late. Now that you are something different than your true self, can you ever go back to the way you were? I might be looking too deep into this, but it feels like a representation of real life. Wanting to grow up faster, leading you to make decisions that you won't realise are bad until much later on. You move on from certain people, or you hurt the ones that tried guiding you. However, by the time you realize what you did, you start questioning yourself if you can ever go back to the old environment and life. This is something that Kingdom Hearts makes you think about and further explores in future games with Riku. His real overall journey about self-reflection and making up for your past mistakes only really starts when Ansem takes over, making him one of the most fascinating characters in the franchise overall, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, we're only discussing the original game today. Quickly to wrap up the story side of things, I do want to discuss Ansem briefly because despite his late game entry, he manages to take over the entire story, make it his own, without it feeling random, but also he makes it much more serious and intriguing. Similar to Riku, this is more about the implementation of what this could mean for the franchise moving forward, as by the time you end up defeating him, you might actually have more questions than answers, which is pretty much guaranteed with Kingdom Hearts at this point. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of his final boss design. It felt way too much like it belonged in Final Fantasy rather than Kingdom Hearts, and I would say the previous stage of the fight is much better. Luckily for us, as the series goes on, I think Nomura understood what a Kingdom Hearts finale should really look like. Not everything needs to be massive. But outside of that, Ansem's takeover of Riku's body is a strong entry to showcase just how behind the scenes all of this was. It makes you ask, just when did he take over? How long has he been in control? Just who is this man? And to some extent, we can get some answers from the Ansem reports, however, it is nowhere near enough. Hence, the future games. As much as I love the franchise and everything it offers in the story, there are things that could definitely be changed or improved upon. Some of these are more due to his age, however some are simply to do with writing. Firstly, when looking at Riku and Kairi outside of the first hour or so, we don't actually get any more in-depth details as to just how close they are to Sora or what they mean to him. Yes, we know they are three best friends and have this plan together of leaving the island, but the game could have shown a few more scenes showcasing them going through other activities as kids. I will say this is more of an issue with Riku since Kairi does get some exploration and flashbacks, as well as the late game story breaks down the importance with her being a Princess of Heart. However, Riku on the other hand is supposed to be your best friend and rival, yet the only thing we really get to compete with him on is racing and a sword fight. If we could get a bit more exploration as to exactly why these two boys are so close, or a bit more showcasing of things they've done together, I believe certain scenes such as the Hollow Bastion one would hit even more, instead of the player just thinking Riku's a dick. As for the gameplay, the biggest issue for a platformer RPG like Kingdom Hearts is stiff and at times awkward controls. A lot of the levels in this game are designed very vertically, for example Deep Jungle, once again, where a bit of smoothness to your movements could lead to less frustration. The camera angle heavily makes this much worse as it is way too close. Having recently introduced the series to my girlfriend, one of the first things she asked was how to zoom out the camera. These are just some things that you will have to get used to and adjust decently quickly, just like the combat feeling a bit stiff and bland early on. However, it is worth pointing out. What can actually be difficult to get used to is some of the cutscenes. I'm not even talking about the cheesy side of things because let's not forget who this was initially marketed at. The cheesy dialogue here or there, or the constant talk of friendship and how it makes one stronger, that's just Kingdom Hearts. You kinda just accept it. What I'm referring to is the voice acting and visuals of certain cutscenes. This was a problem that many games from the early 2000s struggle with, as the voice acting just wasn't that great back then compared to what we have now.
You probably shouldn't laugh anymore.
Most of the most important scenes will have the better graphics used on them, so unfortunately, the immersion remains when it matters most. But overall, the game shows its age much more in the visual and cinematic aspects rather than the gameplay, which you'll find yourself getting more used to the more hours you put in, as well as it becoming more diverse. Kingdom Hearts has managed to make people fall in love with it for nearly 20 years now. There is so much that's iconic about it, from its basics like the keyblade itself or the lovable cast, but we have to be honest here, there is no way to talk about Kingdom Hearts without mentioning its music. Throughout the game, the soundtrack is full of Disney-inspired themes, but with just the right amount of JRPG fantasy added in. Each world has tracks that fit perfectly, and they feel like they belong in that Disney film to begin with. Not only is it beautifully composed, but the weight it carries for all these years should not be overlooked. Because some of these tracks are more than just music, they are memories for all the players who have stuck around with the series all these years later. They trigger an emotion inside you that no other product can provide, and in my eyes, that takes it beyond being just a great soundtrack. It's not easy trying to live up to Disney standards of musical performance, but Kingdom Hearts took on that challenge whilst also making sure to create game-specific tracks to stick around for many years to come. Where I mentioned some of the voice acting or visuals might be slacking a little bit and can throw off the immersion, I would say more than half of these scenarios are saved by the music. The voice acting might not get you the feels, but a slight piano building up in the background is enough on its own. Tracks like Dearly Beloved or Simple and Clean will always be fan favourites, but for me, someone who loves nothing more than a track to make me emotional, always on my mind is a track that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Having heard it for the first time at the very end of Kingdom Hearts 1, anytime I hear it now, I feel a burst of emotions, both happy and sad, which may sound confusing, yet I can't explain it any better. It's one thing to create a soundtrack that's enjoyable to listen to whilst playing, but it's another to create one that will stay with you for years and bring you right back to the moment you heard it first. For a JRPG, Kingdom Hearts isn't exactly the longest game. After all, there's a trophy for finishing the game in less than 15 hours, which honestly isn't even that challenging due to how easy the game is for the most of it. However, finishing the story doesn't necessarily mean you're done, because there's a lot of enjoyable side content to get yourself lost in. And if your goal is to get that sweet 100% trophy, then all I'm gonna say is, you're not even halfway there. Even if you're not interested in getting a platinum trophy on the game, the post-story content is very much worth your time. Ranging from hidden treasures, finding 99 Dalmatians, completing the synthesis list, completing gummy ship missions, finishing the game without changing equipment, and of course, let's not forget the secret bosses. As mentioned earlier, a lot of these hidden treasures and areas aren't available until much later on when you acquire new skills. There is a solid amount of stuff to do, and honestly, for the most part, it's an enjoyable experience. The main issue I would say is that it takes a lot of time and patience to get all the right items, especially if you're trying to get the ultimate weapon. Just grinding for the right items will have you leveling up without even realizing it and making you ready for the secret bosses. Over the years, Kingdom Hearts as a franchise has become known for having some of the most iconic secret bosses, plus they do often have something to do with a future game down the line, making them more than just a cool looking different boss. The original Kingdom Hearts is where this all started, with the final mixed version of the game offering 5 secret bosses, 2 of which are a completely different challenge from everything else you faced up until this point. Both Sephiroth and the Unknown are the hardest bosses in the game, but what makes them so difficult isn't purely just how strong they are, but it's more about how they utilize their attacks and their movements throughout the fight. I would say these 2 bosses fight at a much faster pace, and their movement seems more advanced than any other boss you've faced so far. They have more fluidity and consistency to how they attack. One simple mistake can cost you the entire fight. They really are the final test before you can say you've completed Kingdom Hearts. But the sensation of beating even just one of them is full of reward and satisfaction that you can't get any other way. If you're by any chance interested in the difficulty of getting the platinum trophy for the game, I would say it's not so much difficult as just long. Getting all the items and leveling up to a max level will take time. However, there's a few spots in the game that are pretty easy to grind for XP, so if you really are stuck, I would just recommend a quick YouTube search. I highly suggest 3 different playthroughs: your initial one to complete and enjoy the game for what it is, followed by the hardest difficulty playthrough, and finally one on the easiest difficulty in order to beat the game in under 15 hours and not change any equipment. You should have more than enough experience by this point to make this easy, plus you can skip cutscenes, which will save you a bunch of time. Kingdom Hearts the game has entered my life when I was just 11 years old, and it's stuck with me ever since. Hence why when I decided to cover it for my next critique, my main concern was I would realize it's actually not a good game anymore by today's standards. I was scared that when I'm done playing and I have to write up the script for this video, I would be bashing on one of my favorite games, hence ruining my childhood to an extent. But this entire video, the whole idea of doing this was a blessing in disguise, because even though it is far from perfect and it really does show its age in certain areas, Kingdom Hearts is more than just nostalgia. It is a good game. In fact, it can be a great game for some. For someone with no memory of playing this as a kid, there is still enjoyment to be found. The game provides a mostly simple yet intriguing story. Looking at it now with the knowledge of future games to follow, it is a perfect start to a greater adventure, a prologue of sorts, especially for characters like Riku. It's not overly complex, but the ending leaves many leads to what could be a much deeper story. The gameplay is outdated and stale, especially during the opening hours in terms of combat, alongside stiff jump mechanics don't make the first few hours any more enjoyable considering the amount of platforming required. That said, it is something that the player can just get adjusted to fairly quickly alongside a well-paced level up system to smoothen out the combat side of things with new skills and abilities. There is a constant amount of things to do and explore both during and post the main story. Having more collectibles that you actually care about compared to most AAA games nowadays, it is a game that's easy to get lost in and fall into the void of getting everything done. Just like me. What Kingdom Hearts can offer is an experience that you won't find anywhere else. There is literally no other game out there combining Square Enix and Disney whilst making it too smooth for how complex this collaboration actually is. You'll get to interact with some of your childhood favourites whilst also meeting one of the most lovable main characters Square Enix has ever produced. The interactions between Sora and everyone throughout the story can be looked at as very simple and nothing more to it, and that's fine. But it can also be analysed a bit further to notice there is an underlying lesson being taught about growing up and how much we are affected by the things around us. Yes, there is a lot of cheesy moments and some really dumb ones too. You will have moments where even as the biggest Kingdom Hearts fan you can't deny how stupid or even awkward it can be. But yet despite all that, it's a game that captured the hearts of many around the world and they haven't been able to let go since. 20 years of a loving fan base with many more years to come. So what's your opinion on Kingdom Hearts? Do you agree with anything I said or do you have a different opinion? If so, I would really like to hear what you have to say in the comments. If you've never played a Kingdom Hearts game before, or maybe if you are currently playing through it, what is your opinion of the game after hearing what I had to say? One of the best parts of these videos is interacting with everyone in the comments afterwards, just reading what you guys have to say even if we totally disagree. End of the day, that's fine because that's what opinions should be. Who's to say anything I mentioned today is actually true? You might think that all of it is just lies, and that's fine. Regardless, if you somehow made it this far into the video, then you have no idea how grateful I am. I know the videos that you might have found me through are Final Fantasy related, but as I move forward, I plan to expand into other games with the Kingdom Hearts franchise being the first step in that direction. If you are still here, then let me know what are some other franchises you would like to see me cover. I had ideas like Bioshock, Persona, and Shin Megami Tensei, or some other Final Fantasies to get through. Of course, that is aside from doing Chain of Memories next in this Kingdom Hearts series. These do take forever, so I don't want to throw out any dates to be expecting videos, but just know I appreciate each one of you that watches these, and if you enjoyed it, then hitting that like button would honestly mean everything. I can't thank you guys enough. I hope you're excited for future videos, so if you haven't already, click the sub button, but with all that said, I think that's enough from me. Have a great day wherever you are. Once again, huge thank you, and I will see you in the next one.